Well, thank you, Marie-Pierre. I'd also like to actually thank you for the invitation and for the 3 invitations that I've had to your conferences, because these conferences are conferences that I come not just as a presenter, but I really come to learn. And I've learned a great deal from these conferences, and it's provoked me to spend more time and energy actually getting to grips with the IT world. And so these conferences, I think, are taking Lean, are challenging Lean to articulate the case in a very, very broad field. Lean in IT, as I'm discovering, is actually a field of fields. And so it's very difficult to make some general remarks that apply to everybody in this field. The field is literally very diverse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and make 5 very simple points, in a sense, to set the scene for the discussions that will follow over the next couple of days. And just make 5 very, very simple observations and questions that we might think about as we go forward. And I make no apologies for starting with the slide that I think I ended my presentation last year with, because this slide really encapsulates the path of Lean, the 5 key elements that lie at the foundation of this whole Lean movement. And it's a framework that is being developed by the Lean Global Network in order to create a framework for co-learning projects that will allow us to conduct our own proof of concept experiments that will generate new knowledge about the use and applicability of Lean. So the first point to notice from this is that Lean is situational. Lean is about solving specific business problems at a micro level or a macro level where you are in your situation. It's not about a magic recipe that fits all situations. It's about figuring out and defining the business problem you're trying to solve, and creating a way of measuring your progress in solving that problem. So establishing the performance gaps that you're seeking to close. And then it's about recognizing that the only way to close those performance gaps is actually by redesigning, reimagining, re-engineering, if you like, but actually completely redesigning the processes that would actually deliver the closing of those performance gaps. So that's where the whole process improvement side of Lean absolutely comes to the fore. And again, we can measure our progress in closing, in applying and improving the processes, and we can track whether those improvements in processes are actually delivering the goal of closing the business results and improving the business performance. But we recognize that having identified how to change the processes that deliver the results, actually those processes require new capabilities. And the capabilities in the right-hand column are actually fundamental. So that raises the question of where do we need what capabilities in order to improve the process to close the performance gaps. So those capabilities actually form the real core of Lean. And they need leading, and they need directing, and they need mentoring and coaching. And at the core of this, we are interested in solving today's problem, but actually the real core of Lean is actually developing the capabilities that we learn through solving today's problem to solve tomorrow's problem. So ultimately, the foundation of Lean is learning repeatedly through practice to use the scientific method everywhere. So the ultimate purpose of Lean is not just to improve today's process, but to build the capabilities to continue to improve tomorrow's process. And that raises some really fundamental questions about learning and about mentoring and about the whole experience of how we do that as opposed to traditional consultants coming and doing it for us, which does not result in learning and improvement and building capabilities to solve tomorrow's problems. So having understood that Lean is about building a continuing framework for practicing the use of the scientific method in solving micro problems as well as solving macro business problems, then there are 3 levels. Now, I'm not proposing this as an ideal organizational structure. I'm just using this as a framework for illustrating 3 levels at which we need to develop those capabilities. The first capabilities which we're familiar with is the capability of actually performing the work. And that's where a lot of agile focus has been, is a different way of actually performing the frontline work of developing new software or delivering a product or supporting the customer. And that's all about stability, making plan versus actual visible, and having a process for dealing with deviations from the plan, problem-solving process. So I think we're very familiar with the front line. The Lean movement has now triggered a huge interest in Hoshin and alignment at the top. And I've seen many multinationals now with long lists of projects, 60 projects, 80 projects on the board list of strategic objectives and projects being performed. I've even been in a hospital where they had 515 different projects on the go, 350 targets being reviewed every day. That is not a management structure that can identify the vital few places and the vital few capabilities that will make the biggest difference to the organization. So actually, as we understand Hoshin not just as a tool, but as a framework for a dialogue around understanding the vital few and focusing efforts on the vital few, then we begin to understand the management tasks, the management challenges at the top of the organization, our ability to distinguish the vital few that will make the biggest difference. And that means understanding where the current frontline process is broken to enable, to unblock those issues. But actually, it's out of understanding the frontline issues that we can also prioritize the projects that need to be deployed to fundamentally restructure the process to improve the way it works. So the second issue is really the focus issue at the top, second capability. Third capability, which we're still coming to, and actually rightly comes third because starting here doesn't work, is the real issue of how do we manage across functions and departments? How do we manage horizontally along the flow, beyond our organization, end to end, to actually create the value the customer is paying for? And how do we manage that horizontal activity while still preserving the strengths of a vertical deployment of knowledge and resources? So that's the third element. So I think there are 3 capabilities we need to learn through our projects. The first is how to perform the work. The second is how to focus on the vital few. And the third is how do we collaborate across the value stream end to end. Now, last year I counterposed 3 different perspectives. The perspective of the chief executive interested in the results of Lean in terms of growth, in terms of better quality, meeting a customer specification more accurately, in terms of action, understanding where to intervene in the value streams to achieve that, where to use the compression of time to free up cash, to align the capacity with demand to reduce unit costs, and in the light of that, to design future systems that require less capital. And the traditional perspective of IT was traditionally all about technical capabilities, thinking forward from the technical capabilities of the systems, modeling and simulating the environment, focusing on asset utilization and forced compliance with the system, all about vertical control and deployed and managed by experts. And that all reflects actually a traditional Taylorist paradigm. The legacy of Taylor is the separation of thinking and doing, the legitimization of experts and consultants, and the focus on vertical control and compliance and asset utilization. So actually, it's not a surprise that IT mirrored that demand, that structure, that mindset from the traditional Taylorist organization. And actually, you can see the legacy of that Taylorist form of organization everywhere. And you might think in your own environment what that means. We see it in big factories making very complex ranges of products for a global customer base. We see a trend towards much smaller dispersed manufacturing and much more tightly controlled supply chains. We see in the distribution environment Amazon now following Toyota's lead and Tesco's lead in distributed warehousing, knowing exactly what customers to support customers closer to where they are. So we've seen big hospitals, big airports being displaced by completely different networks. Ryanair is now talking about serving 1,500 locations across Europe. So literally flying point to point rather than flying through these great big monster hubs. So you can see it everywhere. Economies of scale led to the thought process of big centralized systems. And those big centralized systems are ripe, absolutely ripe now for being disrupted by competitors offering alternative business models. So the lean approach, in contrast to the traditional approach, if you like, I'm just taking IT here as the example that we're focusing on, is all about thinking back from the customer. It really is trying to get into the heads and minds of the customer, not just what's currently in the mind of the customer, but what could be in the mind of the customer with our knowledge of what we could offer in the future. So it's thinking back from the customer. It's about developing the capabilities to unblock the flow of work. It's about optimizing the whole value stream rather than optimizing the utilization of individual assets along the value stream. It's about the horizontal coordination and aligning that coordination with the demand of the customer. And it's also about engaging everyone. If we're going to integrate processes, we have to close the gap between thinking and doing and actually engage everybody in the process, in stabilizing the process, in collaborating and improving the process together. So this is what the lean challenge is. Can we develop a different vision and a different mindset in designing our IT systems to support these disruptive business models in the future? So the next point I want to make is that I think I observe from my limited contact with the agile world, I observe the agile movement to me reminds me of the movement in Scandinavia in the late 80s, early 90s, the independent autonomous work team environment, carving out in a Taylorist system an island of freedom where people can be treated as creative individuals and explore what they think is necessary. And ultimately, that was superseded, all of those experiments on the shop floor with the autonomous work teams and so on, that was ultimately superseded by a much more focused lean process environment. So I think there's actually a lot of agreement between the lean world and the agile world on the basics of how we actually manage the work in terms of creating a tact, creating a rhythm against which we can see whether we're behind or ahead, on making the work visual, making the progress visual, on repeatedly reviewing that and taking action to close the gap where we have not met the target or where we've exceeded the target, and problem solving and reflection, which is perhaps less practiced, is actually reflecting on what worked and what didn't, and incorporating those lessons into the next cycle. And that, I think, is an extremely important challenge that we all face, is actually we spend time thinking about how to solve today's problems and manage today's work we spend not enough time universally across the lean movement actually capturing the lessons from that and feeding those in a systematic way back into the next iteration, so we don't repeat unnecessary work. We don't end up doing lots of rework. We actually improve the process because we are embodying the experience of the people running the process in actually designing the process itself. That raises several questions. Are we actually thinking entirely in terms of projects? And to me, it looks like we have a mixture of projects and a pipeline often of existing rework coming from the existing processes, interspersed with projects to develop new systems or new elements of a system. And even in the project world, there's a project and another project and another project. I think the distinction between a project and a pipeline actually is not that great, if you think about it. What we've got is a capability, and we want to flow products or tasks through those capabilities. But that raises a question about whether we should actually flow different types of tasks through the same pipeline. Should we actually dedicate and separate some pipelines to the more routine tasks, some pipelines to absolutely new projects, to minimize the setup and changeover time, and to create a better ability to focus on the projects or on the managing the improvement work? There isn't an answer, and it's situational, but it's a question that needs thinking about. So I don't think one size fits all. This IT world has as diverse a range of different types of situations as the manufacturing world, from the automotive industry to making huge one-off machines to running a process industry. It needs a very different approach to managing the flow through those processes. Likewise, in IT, it needs different approaches. And I was very taken by Pierre from Toyota last year, writing on the Lean Post that, in fact, Toyota uses all sorts of different software methodologies that are fitting the different types of projects. So actually, one size does not fit all. So do we separate the flows? How long is the scope? And I'll come back to that. So, and the one question that isn't really mentioned on there, which I think is increasingly important, is how do we actually work with dispersed teams in multiple locations? Easy to work where we sit in one Obeya room, not so easy to work when we're across oceans and time zones. But the other questions are, what kind of management actually do we need to manage this work? And what are the questions, whether you call them managers or team leaders, I don't mind, but what are the actual tasks of management? I think there are several tasks. Obviously, see and enable the work. The task to unblock issues that cannot be resolved at the point of work, and to create the right conditions. To be able to see where the work process is broken, and if necessary, escalate those issues. But certainly to send signals upwards through the organization that signal that this process is broken, our value creation process is being disrupted, and because of a situation that senior management needs to unblock. Often, in many organizations, that's a failure to create stability in the order flow, in the decision flow, that actually creates the chaos down in the work creation process itself. Provide clear direction of focus. Why are we doing these things? And there again, look at the list of management projects and see how many of those projects are actually clearly defined in terms of closing those growth, cash, cost, and CapEx performance gaps. Connecting across departments, I'll come back to that, and mentoring the capability, mentoring the development of capabilities, not just individual capabilities, but the capabilities of the team working together. And I think that's a new skill for most managers, but is a crucial part of extracting the benefits of building capabilities and creating and feeding those back into the process. So a lot of questions to think about what management is actually necessary to enable the value-creating work to take place. Because actually, what we're trying to do is build a management system to support the work. We're actually building the necessary management to enable the work to take place. Much of what we have in the superstructure is about the politics of resource allocation and fights between functions. So I'd just like to end by posing some questions about the scope. As I perceive Agile is a framework, is a philosophy that was developed within a function. And the question is, can that extend beyond the function? Because in fact, the value stream extends beyond the function. It actually is focusing on improving manufacturing or product development or software development or distribution is great, but actually the value stream extends beyond that, in both directions. It extends to encompass the whole process of defining value and understanding the risk, and it encompasses the feedback from users of the system over the life of the system. And so I think we need to extend our scope and think about how we can incorporate and think about the entire value stream related to software. Now again, this is situational. And prompted by this conference in the past, prompted by reading the Lean Startup book, I've actually got involved in a Lean Startup myself. And I've just gone through the experience of pitching to some extremely important venture capital organizations in London with a technically extremely good, I think, startup organization. And what isn't described in Eric's book, the Lean Startup book, is that whole process of developing the business case. Developing and defending the business case, understanding the market, understanding potential competition, and so on. That is a key part in the startup world that is not yet explored, certainly not codified and described, and I'm sure there are many others that we're going to discover. So we're just at the stage where we think we've got some venture capitalists interested and some angels interested in our startup. The startup work, nicely described in the Lean Startup book, and nicely encapsulates the whole principle of rapid learning cycles and validated learning and the idea of pivoting in the light of those results. I think it's nice because it is contained and the whole value stream is evident in a Lean Startup, so you can get your arms around it. Much more difficult when you're in an environment where a big organization developing the next generation product, somebody else often is doing the work of really understanding what the current customer, who the current customers are, exactly what they do as opposed to what they say, exactly who are the competitors offering these solutions to customers, and really understanding how the customer goes about meeting the need or solving the problem that they're trying to solve. I think that has to be an integral part of also designing the solution that will serve those customer needs. And integrating the whole customer feedback process, I think, is a great opportunity for IT. We now have the possibility of having a dialogue, of knowing exactly who our customers are, of creating a dialogue, of digging down into individual customers, symptomatic customers, and really understanding their situation at first hand. There are lots more rich ways of even predicting customer behavior and mapping customers' problem-solving consumption processes that can actually give us more clarity on the specifications of the value stream, the product, the solution that we're trying to create. So I think that needs to be integrated better into actually doing the work. And I think later on in the whole feedback process, once a system or a product generation is in place, understanding the reasons why changes happen and reasons why some of the rework has to take place and feeding that forward into the next product. That's something that's really well established in the in the traditional industries, but is not, I think, established in the IT world. And I literally do not believe that IT is inherently chaotic and inherently full of errors. That's what they told me about the construction industry many years ago. And yet when we focused on understanding the reasons for things not going right in the construction process, we focused on integrating the design team and creating a business model that, that encouraged the design team to go as far as they could, much, much further in really specifying the work. That resulted in a much compressed and a much more streamlined and much higher quality execution of the actual building itself. So we built the Olympics on time and on budget. That's a long process, but actually taught me that actually you can eliminate an awful lot of the noise and variation and uncertainty and errors in the process if the 3 steps of value definition, value creation, and support actually form an integrated whole. And finally, the third example I'll take is is designing a system for the internal operations. And here the big lesson, I think, that I've observed over the last few years is that if you don't have knowledgeable users that you're trying to design a system for, you will design the wrong system. And you will try and force compliance with the system, and you will be trying to automate a broken process. However, if you lean the process first, and the people have been involved in redesigning the work themselves and own the process, then you have expert users who are absolutely able to articulate the needs for greater communications, for sharing information, etc., that make software really useful. So the big lesson, the very big lesson for me is don't automate until you've leaned. So lean first, develop the expert users, and then work with those expert users in a modular, adaptive, iterative fashion, and feedback the lessons from the failure demand, if you like, of all of the things that arise from the previous system that could have been incorporated into the design of the next system, because that's where it takes place. So in conclusion, I would draw 5 very simple things that we need to think about. The first is the fundamental point about lean is that we learn by doing experiments. This is how we learn to practice you're really using the scientific method. And do it for me doesn't work. Both getting people to do it for me or consultants to do it for me, that does not build the capability that will last. I think we now know that. The second is we need to not only build greater capabilities of working together to actually perform the work, we need to develop the capabilities of seeing the whole, and we need to be enabled to be sitting in the same room working with people, defining the demand and dealing with the feedback. So we need to be able to see the whole, and we need to be able to learn to focus. And the better we are at understanding the work, the capacity, the better we are at planning the work cycles, the better we will be at understanding the capacity of our system and actually focusing on what the system can actually deliver rather than overpromise and underdeliver. The third is, I think there are some very powerful lessons to be learned in designing systems in the future. Rather than big systems, big batch systems that are imposed on users, often not very informed users, we need to think about iterative, modular, adaptive systems. You know better than me what that means, but I think it's quite fundamental. It's the thought process in designing the system that needs to change from the traditional Taylorist model. And the fourth point I want to make is that hands-on management, leadership, whatever you like to call it, mentorship, the critical thing is actually bringing together the definition, the work, and the feedback, and encourage us all to reflect on today's work and how we can eliminate unnecessary work tomorrow, and create an environment in which people are willing to do that, because they experience the fact that actually standardizing the routine, rather than killing the opportunity for creativity, actually frees up time for creativity. And that is a difficult lesson to learn, but a very powerful, important lesson for creative types to experience. So the reflection process can actually bring the unnecessary work to the surface, and then we can incorporate that into the way we work in the future. And the final point, it starts with defining value and risk with actual customers, actually going down and talking to real customers, and envisaging not just the data that's coming out of these customers, which is extremely powerful and rich if we can drill down to the key clusters and the key patterns in that data, but actually it's enriched by actually talking to real symptomatic users. So those are the 5 questions that I want to leave you with. I think it's taking us into a world in which it's challenging our mental models. It's challenging the mental models of the management of the organizations within which we work. And so that they have to come on board as well. You have to change the way they manage us as much as you have to change the way the work is done. And it's opening up new opportunities to utilize the benefits of IT and use Lean as a framework for thinking about the next generation of disruptive businesses that will not be built around the legacies of mass production. So thank you. That's what I had to say.